Buzzwords to business tools, right? There's been a lot of great questions today on, do you do things with relationships with AI? Where do you use it? How do you use it? So this talk would kind of be not necessarily the buzzwords of like, what's an LLM? What are those things? Happy to answer those, but really kind of how do you start to think about AI in your business and then walk through a framework of how to actually get started, right? And how things happen. So when you think about the first thing, right, you've probably been hearing of you should use AI for the last couple of years. And you talk to lots of people who are like, we're not going to use it, or I think I should use it, or I don't know where to start. All right, so you've been hearing this, a lot of people have, and you may be wondering like, well, where do I start? How do I get going? What do I do with this? What is the right thing, right? You saw lots of different tools from, using Poke to Claude to OpenClaw to all these different things, right? And sometimes you end up where you feel like you're a kid in a candy shop trying to figure out what are you going to do, right? And if you watch the news or read things or listen to things, there's new tools, new announcements every day, right? And it gets super confusing. There's a lot of hype and a lot of noise. And you see some of the traps that really kind of hold up your first try. The first one of tool shopping is all the different things and what to pick. Right? The reality is whether you choose ChatGPT, you choose Claude, you choose Gemini, you choose, any of them, Grok, pick your tool, they're going to be pretty close. Right? And the reality is it's not really the tool that you care about, but what are you trying to solve with the tool? Right? And go from that standpoint. What are you trying to get done, not necessarily the tool? On the demo chasing, everyone's got a demo of everything coming out, right? As soon as OpenClaw came out and it was like all the rage, you have OpenClaw experts that were born in a day, having videos on here's the expert way of how to use it. But they've only used it for like 14 hours at best, right? And most likely they didn't even create their own video, right? So they have a demo of how to do something. Always look to see like how do you reproduce it, right? If you're currently a student, hopefully this has been driven into you of you go and do research. The whole idea of doing research and reading research is can you reproduce someone else's research and results? Can you reproduce a demo, right? So look to see, are there artifacts that you could use, or is it someone that's just talking, right? And it probably wasn't even written by them to begin with. And then trying to boil the ocean. And I think the latter example that Brian gave was great of like, start small, all right? Start with simple things. Years ago, I worked for a company called Hortonworks, and we used to have this placemat that we would show customers, and it had all these use cases. And it would go start from the bottom left of something simple all the way up to like the top right of really advanced use cases. And they always wanted to run to like the super hard use case. Like, but you don't even have the foundation yet. And you're trying to do all these big things, but you haven't got there. AI is the same way, right? With all these tools, think about the simple thing you could start to do, right? Not just I'm going to have it replace all my work, like the example of a engineer that had it go and do everything and went and created phone accounts and everything else, right? Start simple with a task that you could give it that's really defined. And I've been in this space for a long time. This is a slide I was going to hide. You don't care to hear this or see this one. I don't either. It's all good. But when you think about it, like AI is a tool, not a strategy. Is anyone familiar with the Jobs to be Done framework? Heard of it before? So if you haven't, it's a framework that basically the premise of it is, you don't go into Home Depot to look for a particular hammer. You go in because you have a job to get done, and you buy a hammer to achieve a job, right? Or you don't get a 1/4-inch drill. You need to make a 1/4-inch hole, right? Is why you buy it. Right? It's been around for a long time. It was made famous by Clayton Christian, who was a Harvard business professor, passed away a handful of years ago. If you've seen the book Crossing the Chasm or things like that, or The Innovator's Dilemma, he had written that. But he made it famous where it's all about what is the job you're trying to get done. The tools will change. This space is changing all the time. All right? So these tools are going to change, but the job you're trying to get done is going to remain. Right? Now we have cars. We don't ride horse and buggy. Our job to get to school, to get to a meeting, to go to the grocery store hasn't changed, right? But the tools have. So just think about it that way as, you can't necessarily make a wrong decision, whichever tool you choose. Think about it more from what am I trying to do? And then what's the right tool for this job? If I'm going to create graphic stuff, looking at what Callista shared earlier, Like, wow, like I'm not a designer, but Canva seems awesome for I need to create a design. I could use that to assist me, right? As opposed to doing some sort of ASCII art or something like that. So think about more of what's the task you're trying to do, and then back into, well, what tool will help you get that done? And be prepared for the tools to change on a regular basis, right? The space is moving very quickly. There's tools that'll come and go. The basic premise of how they work is going to continue to evolve. But what you're trying to do with them is most likely going to continue to be consistent, right? Of certain things you're going to do. Email's not going away. You're going to be triaging email for quite some time until we could all just use telepathy one day, right? We're going to have email. So I'd encourage you to kind of like, stop the theater, if you will, and really kind of think about one task. What's one thing that I could start on that I could get going with AI, right? And you could pick something that is real. I think, as Al said, of like giving AI a seat at the table, that's really kind of the way I think to think about it is a design colleague, it is a writing colleague, it is something that you could start to give this persona to say, okay, what can I have it do? Right? And how do I help it? And how do I help in my job? So the framework, the four F's that I kind of walk through, and then there's a handout for it as well, and we'll go into each of these, really kind of helps you figure out how do you start to think about putting this together, from the frequency of a task to the friction of a task to the format of the data, and then to the forgiveness. Right? And the forgiveness being like, how forgiving is this if it goes wrong and goes sideways? Right. So we'll walk through each of these and kind of discuss them. And again, you have a handout, and if you want the slides, I'm sure Andrew could share the slides, or I could share the slides with you as well on these. But when you think about the frequency, you kind of have, the green light, red light, and some of these are, arguable as to what it is. But you think about, if you're doing something regularly, all the time, it's probably a good candidate. Right? Now, I violate my own premises and my own rules. I had used this to play around to figure out, like, okay, I'm going to see what I can make these tools do. I use them almost on a daily basis, building software, running businesses, doing things, and play around with all these tools. But decided that I'm going to use one of them to put together my P&L for my taxes for last year. I figured, okay, I know it's one time a year, should be every month, every quarter or something, but I get, not something I enjoy doing sometimes, so it goes in the back burner. So I use it to do it, right? So I violate my own rule of, hey, if it's something you're doing regularly, right? This is more of how do you get the bang for the buck? Is it worth your investment of a little bit of time with a tool for something that you're doing on a daily basis, every a couple of times a week, right? Does that free up your time, right? Do you get back a couple of hours of time to be able to do something? So think about stuff that has a frequency to it. So it's worth your time investing with a tool. The friction, right? Is it something that's just tedious, repetitive? It's just, or just really, one of those tasks that you don't enjoy doing. Right? When we think about what's possible and what I'd like AI to do, I'd love it to do my dishes for me. Right? I don't know if we're getting there yet, but that'd be great if I had Rosie running around like the Jetsons. I don't want the rest of the Jetsons, but that would be great. Right? But what's something that you may procrastinate on that's tedious? If it's something that you actually enjoy doing, maybe you don't want to give it up, right? And that always comes with a grain of salt, right? As to let's think about where that's going and what you're working on, right? I have lots of colleagues and people I've known that are software engineers that they will talk about they love writing code, they're passionate about it, they don't want to use AI. I'm like, well, you don't really get paid to write code, you get paid to solve problems, right? So you kind of need to think about the job differently. When you think about the format, these language models, large language models, are designed around text. Now, clearly, like with Canva and other things and stuff that you see with Gemini and all the different models, they're multimodal now, right? So they could do different modals, which is the different types of content, whether it's text, whether it's images, different types of things, right? So depending upon what you're using, think about the type of data that you have that you could give it, right? They're great at looking at pictures, right? We've had image recognition for quite some time before any of this latest wave of, all the conversational things. But think about the format that you have and does that fit the tool you're going to use? Right? You could use the different tools that are out there now, like Nano Banana and others, to say, I want to do image generation. That's a task I have. Or Canva could create great presentation content for me. Or another tool that was mentioned, right? So think about those tools and do you have the right format and the data for it? Right? And how do you go about doing that? And then forgiveness, right? You could think about this from what happens if it does do something wrong, right? Is that okay? There was a question earlier about using AI for relationship, right, and forgiveness, and we talked about agentic. And so, unfortunate but true, story. Working with a customer that does automotive dealerships, and IT person is embracing all these technologies, doing all sorts of things with it, and they decided to set up a system that would respond to customer service emails, and it was all automated, just like you get lots of automated things. Well, it sent an email to a customer. The customer was irate to begin with, responded back saying, I do not want to talk to an AI bot, all this type of stuff. Responded back very heated and upset. Well, this agent responded back saying, I am not an AI bot. I am a AI virtual assistant and all these things. So then Ren Luke, he had to get involved. He's like, we had to shut it off and teach it that you can't do that because now you had a customer that was even more upset. Right? So they're upset first, and then it responded feeling like it was insulted. They got called a bot when it's an AI assistant, right? So there is this thing of like this forgiveness, right? And when you think about, the agentic stuff was brought up, you can almost start to think about all software now being agentic, right? And just think about all of it being agentic. Whatever you're using, everything's going to have agents, and they're all kind of agentic. And then it becomes a spectrum of basically risk portfolio and a risk profile of where do we let them be things that we completely control to things that are totally autonomous, right? If it schedules a meeting and it's off by a day, it's not the end of the world. I could contact that person and change the meeting. If it sends something to a customer autonomously, that could be business damage and have high risk. If it perhaps went and put a bid on a car on eBay for me, that would be high risk, right? So you think about them on this spectrum of how willing are you to be okay with the decision that gets made and what it does, right? It's important, I think, to think about this as human in the loop. Love the idea of what's been talked about from like the education of using it to co-create, right? It's a human in the loop. Al had said that, I like to say the phrase of like, outsource the typing, but not the thinking, right? So still you're responsible for the thinking part, right? If you're building a presentation that AI has helped you build, you are still responsible for the thinking and the design and what goes into that, even if it typed, right? If you're old enough to remember, like IBM had a product called Dragon, naturally speaking, like 20 something, 30 something years ago, right? It was speech recognition. It was the same thing. It would go from speech and to type it into a document for you. So we've been working at these things for a really long time. How do you do it? So you think about this like from the forgiveness side. So if you think about this as like, a real type of use case, if you will, like here's an example of like a contractor that hated email. Right? So how many times have you used someone that is going to build something for you or do work around the house or something, and you're chasing people for a quote, right? Or it doesn't happen, right? Very common thing, common in like lots of professions. As Al said, we're working with a customer, and we asked even the president of the company 3 days ago to send me an NDA before I travel there next week to work with them. Still have yet to receive it. When it's like, we'll have it this afternoon. Like that should just be somewhere that you could attach a file, right? But it's obviously a pain point for them to think about these things. So as an example, like a local contractor does, like say 8 to 12 quotes a week. Well, they don't like sending email. They get home, they're tired, all these types of things. Email doesn't go out, right? But you think about that from, does it meet the needs of, say, frequency? Yeah, it's happening in enough and it's repetitive. The friction, clearly they have friction with it. The format of it, it's text, it's an email and a quote for their services, right? And forgiveness, yeah, it's, they could correct it and it's probably not that bad if it's slightly off in some of the things, right? We're used to seeing emails that sometimes aren't extremely polished, right? And people sometimes write in different styles, right? So now you could have a real simple prompt and do something where it could almost be certainly done in an agentic way or use, poke, things like that to say, put together an email for customer A. Here's my services. Right? All of a sudden, that becomes a pretty simple process that they could then approve and send. All right, so you kind of go through this process and do that. How am I doing on time? I never started my timer. It's terrible. Said I was going to use it, but then I didn't start it. Right, so you just think about it in this fashion. So the cost of waiting another year, right? It's this stuff is here, and spoke the other night with Al at a different meeting and said, look, this is the worst AI you're ever going to use, right? What you see today is the worst, right? And that's so it's going to constantly get better. Every day it improves, right? Every day you could push and challenge these things. It was only a couple of years ago. I can remember my partner and I sitting around, and she doesn't use these tools at all. She is it just has different views on some of the stuff at all, and doesn't believe in some of the hype or other stuff. But we started asking, and you could use things in different environments to test different models. And it was only a couple of years ago, you could ask like three or four models, tell me Abraham Lincoln's age when he took office. And each one would give you a different age. And sometimes they weren't right, at all, and they would have all these problems. Those problems are being solved, right? Hallucination will be solved. These things will get better and better and faster, right? So today you're using the worst, right, of what you're going to use compared to tomorrow and next month or in a year, right? So they are going to change, and it's going to impact businesses for sure, but much more of how do we think about working. And I like to, strongly believe that it improves our ability to have freedom to create and to do more, right? And to have the relationships that it can't do, right? It's just not possible, right? So I think if you look at it, right, it's like find some use case to do, pick something by between, now and next Friday, try it, and then go ahead and track it and see like, did it change? Did it help? Can I do it again? Can I do it with something bigger? Don't be afraid to experiment with it. Clearly, if you give it full permission of your computer, then it could break things, right? But if you're giving it simpler tasks to do where you know that you could review it or it's not going to break something, then I'd encourage you to kind of just keep iterating on this and learn how to use these tools. A lot of them you could use for free, right? And you could think about and at least get started with. So I did have a handout. I think I'll just assume that I'm close to time. I have no idea what time it is. I think I'm close. But I'll go ahead and open it up for questions if you have, and of course I'll be at a table as well. So questions about this, other AI stuff? Nothing. All right. Oh, yep. Sorry, I couldn't see with the light above you. Yeah. So the risk of it being wrong and the risk of them getting either interacting with it. I mean, you could do customer surveys for things. You could give people an option. Right. So you could ask people to, have an option as to which way they route. Most people are not going to probably choose. So if you could have a system where you could do your own kind of testing with that and route certain customers through voice and certain customers through a human and see what the resolution time is. There's a huge push for obviously, you see things like, hey, customer service is all going away and all going to be automated. Uh, I think I've interacted with like one or two customer service AI agents in the last like year that it was actually a pleasant experience that worked. Right. So I would route people and see and then measure it that way. Right. I think you need to have the data, and the easiest way would just be kind of like A/B tests of like we route X percent of people here, and this is the resolution. We route people here because you're going to have to continue to enhance that and continue to make that better. Right. And to figure out how do you make that a better experience for the user as well as the accuracy of the data. Would be an approach that I would take. Okay. There's nothing else. Oh, I think there's always going to be experimentation and changing. I mean, that's happened with technology all the time, right? Software changing, software evolving, technology changing. We don't use the same laptops we used, a year ago, 3 years ago, right? That's constantly changing. If you look at some of that, that will change. If you look at like NVIDIA, right, that you see like in the news and everything, before all like the AI, boom and all these things that have happened, they were still producing new chips at almost at every 6 month clip. And that was driven by the gamers desiring better and better graphics. So they were constantly innovating, but your interaction with that never changed. So I think you're going to see that constant innovation that's going to happen. I think some of the hype that you see will disappear at a certain point, kind of like the whole, .com bubble and everything else, right? There was a whole lot of hype, a lot of stuff went away, but the fundamentals of what came about during that time are still the same, right? We now have even better infrastructure and things like that. So some of the core principles stayed. The interaction and the conversational experience, I think that's going to continue to evolve. I'm going to continue to have it. I continue to have more of this conversational experience. I think people have certainly, I think in a way spoken of they prefer to interact in a conversational way with the technology than typing something in, right? And it's made it much more accessible to everyday business user, to everyday people, and to like a business user to be accessible. So I think there's going to be a constant change in this technology. There's a tremendous amount of research. I think we're just scratching the surface on what could be done in the research that lies ahead. So I think you're going to see it constantly evolve. And that's why I say that, think about it as what are you trying to solve? And keep in mind that those tools are going to change. Right? It was only a handful of years ago you didn't have a self-driving car, right? So if you have kids in elementary school today, I mean, they may never drive a car with a steering wheel, right? It just may not be around, right, or be a thing. Right? I have kids that are older in college now, but I used to tell them that you're never going to drive with a steering wheel, and they used to get scared. But obviously that isn't there now, but it's not far off, right? It's still in this, probably 10 years, 15 years, maybe there isn't, but you're still going to have that same job he's trying to get done of I need to get somewhere, right? So yeah, this technology is going to continue to accelerate, I think, the pace of innovation. So just think about the task you're trying to do and not the hype that you see of people talking about all these crazy things that they think it can do.